He saved my life, you know. 30 years ago, I was knifed in a bazaar in Calcutta. He carried me to the hospital on his back.
Who stabbed you?
He did.
You know what they do in that particular department, anyway. Are you still a cop? No! No! Swear on your mother's grave you're still not a cop?
Can I not walk up here quick?
Oh, look, David, a boot.
A boot.
Don't hit George, David.
I wasn't gonna hit George.
Daffodils.
They're your favorite flower.
How did you get so many?
I called everywhere in 5 states. I told them it was the only way to get my wife to marry me.
You don't even know me.
I have the rest of my life to find out.
Hey, how are you? I'm Mark. I am the Cinemaniac. You are hopefully a Cinemaniac if you're watching this show. If you've been watching on Facebook since we actually started, you're a bigger Cinemaniac than any of us. We are here live on Facebook currently. We do this every week around 1:30 p.m. EST. We send the show out live as we record it. And if you were watching today when we started, or if you watch this playback on Facebook, you'll be getting extras that the cable and YouTube audience won't get ever. So we are here to discuss what I saw over the last weekend, which is sadly only one in the theater, still trying to play catch up, and a few things on video, and then I'll talk about some events that are coming up that I like, if you like the kind of stuff that I like, and whatever else. We'll fill out the hour as best we can. So as I said, we do this show live on Facebook every week because we can, for the same reason a dog cleans itself. And those of us who were watching earlier just got a little treat and the magic of live TV, and thank you for watching, all of you. Person there. And we're going to move right along now to the first film that's in the theater. This is a film that's based on a true story. This stars Jennifer Lopez and Constance Wu, who you may know from Crazy Rich Asians. I was watching this whole movie and I'm like, where have I seen this before? So the film is Hustlers. It's Constance Wu, who starred in Crazy Rich Asians, and you have Jennifer Lopez, and you have Cardi B briefly, very briefly in the film, and then Julia Stiles. And the story, basically, it's based on a true story. From what I was reading right before we did the show, History versus Hollywood, great website for this sort of thing. It's pretty accurate for the most part. There's a little artistic license here and there, but for the most part, this is true. You had a group of dancers at a strip club in New York City, a fairly high-end strip club, who fell on hard times. The club and the dancers fell on hard times, and they decided basically to come up with this scheme to basically shake down rich dudes and take them for all that they were worth. The film sort of follows the story through the Constance Wu character as a fairly new dancer, and she's learning the ropes and learning what it's like in the club, and then she meets Jennifer Lopez, who's been around for a long time, and then, you know, one thing leads to another, and a few years later, they're both hard up for cash, and Lopez comes up with this scheme where basically, in exchange for a cut of the money they bring into the club, they sort of wine and dine and eventually start drugging these Wall Street types and bring them into the clubs and basically max out their very high limit expense cards, credit cards, and they get a cut of that money. So they basically get rich off these dudes who are, you know, looking for a little action they're never going to get. So I didn't know what this movie would be like going in. It looked like sort of a crime drama, and it is that. It's also a lot. It's funnier than I expected it would be. Not throughout, but it's pretty light. And it gives you a good insight into the inner workings of that world and the clubs and the scheme and the scam that they did. It almost reminded me of Boogie Nights in a way, with the Constance Wu character, who's somebody who's new to this industry and is fairly innocent and is just looking to be successful and make money and support, you know, her elderly grandmother, I think, and her family, and later daughter. And she gets in over her head and she realizes it's going in a direction she doesn't like. And there's just certain vibes with where the Mark Wahlberg character toward the end of Boogie Nights went with this movie. This is no Boogie Nights, but I thought this was really quite good. This was very interesting. The drama was good. The humor was good. Not as salacious as you'd expect for the subject matter, because it's the 2000s. You're not going to see nudity in a movie. You'll see a beheading, but not a lot in the way of nudity. For fans of Cardi B, she's in the movie a little bit. She's a former dancer herself. Not much of an actress. I'll just say that. I'll say Probably it's okay that she wasn't in the film any more than she was. Now, I had the opportunity to bring an expert witness with me to the theater to see this, which I was very excited about. I have a friend who's a dancer, not at a club who's anything like the one in this film, more regional, local kind of thing. And I just wanted to see what her opinion was. I was like, you tell me what's right and what's wrong with this movie. And it was great because she was sitting next to me and I would hear these giggles and I would look over and she'd either be nodding or shaking her head that the behavior on screen was what she has to deal with all the time. So as far as the inner workings of the club, how the dancers get paid, what they have to pay out, they actually wind up paying a lot of money out. It's not just all a shower of cash. And how, the different dynamics of the customers and the other dancers and the people who work there. Apparently that's very accurate in this film, if you're curious. I also read where there was a consultant who was hired to make sure that the performances the actresses gave as far as on stage were accurate and that it wasn't, demeaning to dancers and just painting them all as, mindless or money hungry or whatever. I thought this was really good. It had a really good look to it. You see in the trailer, it has a really nice visual style. It's nothing like really insanely artistic or flashy, but it's just a lot of pretty colors and twinkly things, and that makes me happy. So yeah, I thought Hustlers was really good. When I went to see this, it was at a matinee. It was a 1 o'clock show on a Friday afternoon, so it was a predominantly older audience, older than me. I think my friend and I were the youngest people there. I think it's a lot of Jennifer Lopez fans. Jennifer Lopez is really good in this. She is like this fierce lion. She is totally in control of every situation in this film. She's very serious and very out to maintain her lifestyle and support her child and get where she wants to go. And eventually the morals kind of take a slide in the way they go about getting that money. And from what I read, the women involved in this operation, they felt like the guys they were doing this to deserved it. They felt like they really didn't do anything wrong. To the point where they're drugging people into unconsciousness and making them taking all their money. They felt like they were still doing the right thing, which I thought was interesting. This film was based on a newspaper article. I think it was New York Times, I'm not positive, which I'm sure you can find somewhere online. And again, from what I've told, it's pretty accurate. So Hustlers is that was, I think, the biggest thing that came out this week. Another film called The Goldfinch I didn't have a chance to see. That looks a little bit more straight drama, not art house, but as much of as a studio film can kind of be art house. I think The Goldfinch is that. This is sort of the popular populist movie for the weekend. Basically, I think the studios were afraid to put out anything against it. They knew it was going to dominate the box office for a few weeks after it came out. It came out last week, chapter 2, I should say. So I think next week we get, what do we get? We get Ad Astra, the new big Brad Pitt movie. Next week or the week after? Okay, so I'm not doing a show next week. I'm going to be gone in Western Pennsylvania. So what I'm telling you is what you're going to hear me talk about the next time I come back, if I get my act together. It is Ad Astra, the new, very interesting looking Brad Pitt film that's about space exploration and maybe 2001 kind of stuff and family and all that. Rambo Last Blood, which is the next chapter in the Rambo saga. I thought they should have ended at the last one. I thought First Blood's a solid movie. Rambo First Blood Part 2 is a little rah-rah, a little silly, but it's a good action movie. For Rambo 3, I thought was not very good, and then they brought it all back with John Rambo, or whatever they called it, I think John Rambo. And that one I thought was really solid and a great way to end the series. And going one more beyond that, I feel like, well, you might be doing one too many. You might be ruining this. So we'll see. That's coming out. And then the Downton Abbey film. I've never watched Downton Abbey. I hear nothing but raves about it. At a glance, it's not the kind of thing I would want to watch, but the more I hear about it, the more I need to take a chance on it someday. A friend of mine saw it the other night, and he said it's probably pretty accessible if you haven't watched the show because they do a good job at the beginning of recapping the events that lead up to the film. Because I thought I was going to be walking into a story already in progress and just be like, who are these people and why are their clothes so uncomfortable? But that's what's coming up. So now we're going to move on to home video, that which you can see on the home video service, platform, device, format, wax cylinder of your choice. We only have a couple here. Mostly it's because of when I do home video, I'm relying either on things that companies give me to review or films I've already seen in the theater. And as far as what's coming out on video this week, there was only one that I had seen in the theater when it was new, and this is that. So I'm going to whiffle on over here. I'll talk about email eventually, don't worry. Sorry about that. We have it all planned out, and then I'm just like, forget that. So we have the latest chapter, and may turn out to be the last, how this movie went. The latest chapter in the X-Men saga. We have the tale of Jean Grey, a young, youthfully female who has a bad time and turns into something other than else. And the other X-Men have issues and help and fight a battle or something. It's been a while since I've seen it. It's called Dark Phoenix. So this film, Dark Phoenix, it follows this new timeline that the X-Men films have. So when you do the math on how long we've had X-Men movies, your knees will shake a little bit because it's like 20 years? Has it been 20? That's a long time. So you had the original run of X-Men movies with Patrick Stewart and Hugh Jackman and Halle Berry and all of the original cast. And what's her name as Jean Grey? Sorry, I'm tired. On the top. Famke Janssen, thank you, brain. So you had those films, and then those sort of came to a close, and you had X-Men First Class, which started with the Hollywood younger, hotter casting, and how did it all begin? The question nobody ever asked. And we had those films, which were really good. And then you had the two casts meet, and it was sort of a passing of the torch in X-Men Days of Future Past. So now this series is continuing from there. This is like a new timeline for the X-Men, using the First Class youths, the youthful cast, the new people playing everybody except Wolverine. And it's a way to continue the saga, and it's in a way to have a new cast, and it's a way to have a younger, more appealing cast, and to let the actors who don't want to do these characters anymore just let it go. And but it also allows them to sort of sadly cover ground they've already covered with other films. I think they were trying to right the perceived wrongs of X-Men 3, The Last Stand, which was a Brett Ratner film that a lot of people didn't like. I thought it was fine. I thought there were elements of it that were a little dumb, but overall I thought it was just a fun movie. But a lot of people really don't like that. So I think the embarrassment of that in some circles was what wound up giving us Dark Phoenix, which retells a lot of the story, retells story elements. The whole Jean Grey becoming Dark Phoenix thing was done in a previous movie. We get it again differently here. This is bad practice on my part, but I honestly don't remember much about this movie. And maybe that's my review. I really don't remember much about this movie. I saw it like I do with pretty much everything as a matinee. I remember it being fine as a matinee, but at the time I also remember thinking it was really inconsequential. Like, I don't think every I don't think every superhero movie has to be the end of the world. It doesn't have to be the biggest stakes ever. It doesn't have to be the galaxy imploding. I always say, give me one of these movies that's 80 minutes and they have to stop a runaway train. They have to foil a bank robbery. A bomb's gonna go off. They have to stop it. It's fine. It doesn't have to be the universe every time. It gets boring when it's the universe every time. So this movie kind of is that to a degree. Basically, it's about Jean Grey, that character, who, again, I don't remember, something happens and she is transforming into this other sort of out-of-control, fiery-eyed being, and the fellow X-Men are trying to stop her, and she's trying to understand what's going on with herself before she wipes out, everybody. And then you have, Magneto's in this and the bad guys and all that, and there's good guys and bad guys and everything and all that. But it's a different world than the previous X-Men movies you watched. So if you watched the original X-Men films a decade or two ago, you're not seeing the exact same storyline in this one. It's it's a parallel kind of thing, which comic books have done forever, and Dark Shadows did that and all that other stuff. So Dark Phoenix, will you like this? Maybe. Do you like superhero movies? Sure. Do you like the X-Men movies? This is one of those. It's a lot of the same characters and actors that you might like. Jennifer Lawrence is in it. I remember it being fine, but as evidenced in right now, I don't remember much about this movie at all. And I think overall it didn't do very well. And actually it was originally going to be called X-Men Dark Phoenix, and they took the X-Men part off that. And they also, the New Mutants, this new movie that's sort of an X-Men related thing about more, young, hot mutants, they've actually tried to remove X-Men references to the film because of the perception of the failure of Dark Phoenix, like that's tainting every other X-Men movie. That'll all change if they make another X-Men movie that's successful. Then it'll be X-Men up the wazoo. It'll be X-Men this and X-Men that. But right now, X-Men is poison, somebody thinks. Anyway, Dark Phoenix, I'm just a rambling guy today. I'm just missing a banjo. Dark Phoenix out on video Tuesday, tomorrow. And if you watch this after Tuesday, it's out on video. Now, we're going to move on to the Arrow Video Corner. We don't have the graphic anymore because Tom made that for our old system, but we'll chat him up anyway. Arrow Video. Do you know Arrow Video? Do you love Arrow Video like I love Arrow Video? Arrow Video is a UK company. They've been around for a decade or more. They put out reissues of older movies. Usually it's genre stuff, and by genre I mean horror, cult movies, sci-fi, weird old fun movies like that, and occasional new stuff. UK-based, a few years ago they decided to open up a US distributorship through MVD, and now you can get their stuff on both sides of the ocean, which is fantastic because a lot of folks, like me and my friends, were buying import copies from the UK because their editions of movies were like the definitive versions. The transfers were the best, the extras were the best, the artwork was cool, and you'd need to have an all-region DVD or Blu-ray player to be able to play these here. Now, about 90%, 95% of what gets released in the UK comes out in the US as well. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you'll see UK only releases because somebody else owns the US rights to a movie. I can't think of, like some of the AIP films, like the Phibes films, the Dr. Phibes movies that I love, and the Pam Grier action movies. A lot of those have Arrow UK releases, but over here, I think Kino has most of those films because they got the rights. So anyway, that's sort of a background. Arrow does amazing transfers. They do really cool restorations. They do really cool extras, new extras. Occasionally I'll pop in an Arrow disc and I'll see somebody I know doing the extras, which is kind of, it's like, hey, it's Chris. Hey, it's Steve. I know him. He's talking about movies on the Arrow disc. Hey, Brian shot that. It's pretty cool. Hey, Mike's doing a location tour. So this is one of those releases. Now, Arrow does a lot of horror. They do a lot of cult stuff, but then they also will occasionally do something like Weird Science, or they'll do, coming up in a few weeks, The Major and the Minor. They'll do these like old studio films, and they'll just give them these really nice treatments. So this is what Arrow is known for, what we're going to talk about now. Maybe I should go over here for that, because we have two cameras. Why not use them? The man took the time to set the camera up. I'll talk into it. This is the sequel to a classic, S-I-C-K, Wes Craven horror film from 1977. This is a few years later. Some of the same cast is returning. Don't roll the clip yet. So you had The Hills Have Eyes, in which a family rolled their Airstream trailer out into the desert and broke down and was set upon by cannibalistic humanoid desert dwellers. And Michael Berryman was one of those. And it was really down and dirty, outrageous, scary, grody, aggressive. It was a big shocker in its day. And now, a few years later, people want to make a sequel to this, and Wes Craven agrees, and he turns out this film. This film is basically one of the survivors of that original family from the first film is now like a motocross rider. He and his friends go out through the desert to go on some motocross thing, and they break down. His girlfriend is one of the cannibal people from the first film. She's all like 80s up now and looks like she's going to the PTA meeting or about to go to Jazzercise or something. And they get set upon by the remaining people who are in that family, and they have to fight for their life once again when The Hills Have Eyes 2. That's the slow goth version of Ruby, Don't Take Your Love to Town. That is this theme song for this film. Kenny Rogers wasn't too thrilled with it, but the check cleared. So we have a 7 years later sequel to The Hills Have Eyes, done by Wes Craven and a crew of people who went out into the desert and braved the elements to tell this really pretty silly tale. I'm not a big fan of the original Hills Have Eyes. I saw it whenever I saw it back in high school on tape, and I was just like, eh. Something about the weird cannibal cavemen people just seemed silly to me. I mean, there are good moments in it of suspense and terror and action and revenge and all that, but for me, the original Hills Have Eyes, it just never quite clicks. So the second one is silly. It's very silly. It's very 80s. It's very 1983 or 84. So you see the motocross people and all their get-up, and Ruby, who's the girl from the original, the daughter or the sister or whatever you want to call it from that family, looking extremely 80s. And it takes a while. It's kind of brilliant in a way, because when you're watching it, until they sort of tip the hand that that's who it is, it doesn't look anything like her. You would never guess it was the same person. The big infamous moment in this movie is that the dog has a flashback. There's a lot of flashback, a lot of footage from the original is used in this film. And there is a scene where the dog from the original, who has survived, thinks back upon what happened to it in the previous film. And what is great is I was watching, there are a lot of extras on this, and I was watching the extras, and the crew all thought it was stupid too. They carried the script around, and they're like, the dog has a flashback? And Craven's like, yep, let's shoot it. So he wasn't even, I think, enamored with this film. I think it was more done for money. His career wasn't going in a great place at that point. This is, I think, right before Nightmare on Elm Street. Threw gasoline on the smoldering ember of his career, had just a tanker port on it, and then he was pretty much good for the rest of his career. So yes, you have dirt bikers versus cannibals in the desert, and it is kind of fun. It's doofy. The dialogue ain't great. It's silly. It's very laughably 80s at times. But there are moments, like in the original, when they hatch their plot to get revenge, or how they're going to outwit, the good guys are going to outwit the bad guys. And it's kind of cool, and it's kind of creative, and it's kind of fun with dirt bikes. Everything's better with dirt bikes. My friend Isaac would always say, you know it's a 70s movie if there's dirt bikes in it. And this wasn't a 70s movie, but there's a lot of dirt bikes. So this and Time Rider would be an outstanding double feature. If you haven't seen Time Rider, The Adventure of Lyle Swan, you really should. It's like a favorite of mine when I was a kid, and nobody remembers it anymore. So if you want like a motocross Baja 500 double feature, Hills Have Eyes 2 and Time Rider. One is family friendly and the other is not. So we have one more Arrow film, and then I'm going to talk about a bunch of other stuff. So I'm actually going to, pardon my back for a second, I'm actually going to read this because this is something I watched a little while ago. I don't speak Japanese, and if I try to fake it, it's very offensive, so I won't this time. Again. So what we have here, it's a collection of 3 films by sort of a visionary art house Japanese filmmaker of the late 60s, early 70s. And he would continue doing work, but these were early films that he did. So pardon my glancing away. This is Akio, Jissoji, the Buddhist Trilogy. Don't run it yet. It's 3 movies, and they're very, I'll get into that in the review, but the films are This Transient Life, Mandara, and Poem. So we're going to run the Arrow video story, this thing that they put together. If you go onto YouTube, you can find their video channel, and they'll show you the original trailers for films, which is what that Hills Have Eyes was, but then they'll also give you like an overview of what the entire set looks like. So we're going to run that and hope there's no nudity that I have to cut out that you'll never see if you're watching this on TV, and then I'll come back and talk about the Buddhist Trilogy. So I'm not going to get into too much specifics about the films themselves in this case. This is, I'm reviewing this because this has been out for a little while and I feel neglectful that I haven't done this yet, so I'm going to get to this based on what I've seen. I watched the first 2 of the 3 films, and I've never heard of this director before. Apparently he's been in the Japanese film industry, or he was, for like 50 years. Everything from like Ultraman movies to films based on the works of Rampo. He's got this huge, wide body of work, and these are 3 films that he did for like this theater guild group back in the, like I said, the late 60s, early 70s. They're very artistic. They're very much art films. They're very, one of them is called Poem. They're very visually poetic in how they convey their story. The stories are not typical stories. They're very edgy. They're very sexually oriented. They're very taboo breaking. They're the kind of things that when you watch the film, you're like, so he went there with that. Okay, this is not the kind of thing you'd see at the multiplex. And they're not. They're really well done. They're very visually interesting. Some are black and white, some are color. There's a lot of interesting visual textures. They're very, very interesting to watch. And again, I'm not going to go into the storylines, partly because I don't want to offend the last 2 people who are left watching the show. Let's just say they're very edgy topics, shall we? Topics that Japanese cinema does not shy away from, but topics that mainstream, enter through the front of the building theaters probably do shy away from for the most part. So as it's Arrow. So it's Arrow Academy, actually, which I didn't talk about earlier. Arrow Academy is a sub-label of Arrow, and they put out the more serious art house films. They put out some newer films, more recent releases, and some like the classic noir films that I was reviewing recently that came from, I think, Universal or Paramount or Akio. Those were Arrow Academy releases, some of the documentaries and things. So Arrow Academy tends to be the more highbrow, let's say. I don't want to say that all of Arrow stuff is lowbrow or not intelligent, but Arrow Academy is sort of the higher echelon of what they put out. So this is one of their releases. And it's like any Arrow set, it's got a good amount of extras that give you context for who this filmmaker was, critical appreciations of these films by generally they're genre scholars. So somebody who's an expert on Japanese cinema will give you an overview of this person's work and of these films and where they fit into that work, and also where these films fit in with the culture of the time and what other things were going on in Japanese cinema at the time. So this is the kind of thing where I went to film school, and I loved the film education classes. I loved the ones that explored certain genres and certain directors and gave me what these arrow sets do. That's why I like these, is that it's a little school. Like if you want to know more about movies from around the world and how they work and where they come from and how they fit in with their times, these arrow sets always do a great job at that. They never just specifically talk about the movie. They give you the bigger picture of what was going on in the world at large or the world of that kind of movie at the time. And I think they make you a little bit smarter if you want to be. So yeah, this Akio Jissoji, the Buddhist Trilogy, is out now, and it is one for people who like art house films, people who are scholars of Japanese cinema, and people who like weird extreme cinema too, because this is that. It's not really like fast-paced and aggressive, because they're Japanese movies, but they are very, very interesting, and they do what the greatest thing I can have a movie do for me, unless it deeply disgusts me, is it shows me something I've never seen before. And these movies did that. So that's out now. That's been out for a little while. So you can find that online and in your local, if you have a local place that sells DVDs and Blu-rays. Locally here it would be Bull Moose. I guarantee they have it. I don't think Walmart or Target would get that because they probably shy away from the incest videos. So that's all I have to talk about here on my sheet, but I still have some time left. And I'll do another chapter of Yappin' for Time, aka what I did on my summer vacation. So last weekend at the Mahoning Drive-In Theater in Laheyton, Pennsylvania, 2 days of Teens Gone Wild weekend. It was 2 days of 80s teen sex comedies. Think Porky's. We didn't show that, but Think Porky's. If we could have, we would have. 3 days of those triple features. It was a co-production with Exhumed Films out of Philadelphia, who has just an amazing film library and puts on amazing shows. They've been doing it for 20 years, and they're going to not stop doing it until there's no more theaters anymore, I guess. And then, actually, no, they're building a theater called The Space, and that will be a place where they can put on shows forever. And we're all very excited about that. So it was 2 nights, and we also had as a very special guest Mike McPadden, who wrote the book literally on the subject called Teen Movie Hell, which I reviewed here a while ago. And he came out, he was selling books, he was doing intros for all the movies. He was a fantastic and funny guy. He was great to hang out with. Everybody was super thrilled that he was there, and he seemed to have a really good time. He also wrote a book called Heavy Metal Movies, which is about films related to heavy metal or punks, or maybe more heavy metal than punks. I haven't picked up the book yet, so I'm not 100% on that. But anyway, he's written a couple books. He works for Gilbert Gottfried's podcast. He does all kinds of cool stuff. He's a great guy. I hope we can find a reason to bring him out again. Maybe we'll do a show based around heavy metal movies, the book, and that would be a blast. So the movies we showed, I'll talk about these. First up was Up the Creek. This was a film that starred Tim Matheson of Animal House fame, a lot of Stephen Furst from Animal House, Dan Monahan, who was the star of the Porky's movies. And I always say it's basically Animal House and Porky's. Animal House meets Porky's on a whitewater rafting race. 2 warring colleges have this big game where they decide who's the best or something like that, and it's a whitewater rafting trip. So you have multiple colleges actually involved, and one are all preppies, and one are the slobs, and one is the military academy, and they're all trying to sabotage each other and get a little when they can and get from point A to point B and win that trophy. Tim Matheson is more or less, he's a lower brow version of Otter from Animal House. Stephen Furst is basically Bluto from Animal House, only less verbal, and everybody else is pretty much the kind of characters they normally would play. I had seen Up the Creek on cable originally. This came out in '84. Produced by Samuel Z. Arkoff, which I thought was pretty cool because he was the guy who gave you American International Pictures. My father once said if you saw the American International logo come up, you knew the movie was going to be terrible. And when he told me that about 2 years later, my attitude was, when you see the American International logo show up, you know it's going to be great. They put out all of the trashy 50s sci-fi movies, or a lot of them. I Was a Teenage Werewolf, the Beach Party movies, the Fives movies, all the Poe movies, Squirm, on and on and on, right up until the late 70s. And so it's a kick to see Samuel Z. Arkoff doing another youth movie, 20, 30 years after the first time he did it, and Up the Creek was it. They had a really good soundtrack. There's like a Beach Boys song in that movie. There's a great Cheap Trick song that you can find online called Up the Creek. That, funny enough, when I started doing DJing, we do have a DJ booth at the drive-in, and we just do, it's almost like a radio show. You talk, you tell what's coming up, and you play some music. And I had Up the Creek on my playlist for the day one when I was going to do a DJ set months ago before I even knew we were running these movies, so I got to play that. And so Up the Creek, I've never been a fan of. Watching it again, I don't really think it's very good. It's cool to see those people in one more movie like that, but ultimately, I just didn't think it was very funny, and it was way too long. It had laughs in it, but it's not a movie for me. After that was Joysticks from 1982 or 83. This was a Ken Wiederhorn. Ken Wiederhorn? No, this was somebody else. Sorry. I'm blanking on the name. It's all off the top of my head, and I'm very tired. Somebody will correct me and tell me. It's, yeah, almost tip of the tongue who did that movie. Joysticks is a teen sex comedy set in an arcade. So it was Pac-Man fever. It was Donkey Kong. It was all that stuff. It's when arcades were just exploding, and somebody decided to capitalize on that and do the sex comedy set in and around an arcade. And it's funny because at times, I don't know that they paid for the rights to do this, but at times the scene transition, instead of a wipe, was Pac-Man going across the screen with sound effects. Joe Don Baker is in it. He's probably the most recognizable person in the film. And it's another slobs versus slobbier people battling out for, you know, who's the king vidiot and who's going to run the arcade, and we need to shut the arcade down because people are doing immoral things there. And it's chock full of nudity, and it's chock full of fun, goofy songs and goofy characters, and I don't particularly like it. I saw it, I remember the TV ads when it came out, and I saw it on, a friend of mine bought a video. It took forever to hit DVD, so he found an ex-rental, I think it was a Vestron tape, on eBay, and we watched it, and I'm like, that's not that great. And watching it again, I have to say, this time, you know, seeing it on a big screen, on film, with friends, with, you know, a cheeseburger and a Mountain Dew Voodoo in my hand, still didn't really like it. Interestingly enough, a friend of a friend put out the soundtrack to Joysticks. It never got an original release, I don't think. And he tracked down the composer, and he found a source for it, and he pressed an LP edition of Joysticks, and it's still out there if you want to find it. Eczema Records, they have a website, and you can buy a Joysticks album. And he kindly donated a copy of that to us to raffle off at the drive-in, and people were really excited about that because, I mean, it's a piece of the movie, so that was really cool. And the third film on Friday was a movie called King Frat. Now that was directed by Ken Wiederhorn, who also did Shockwaves, which is a movie I love. It's the Peter Cushing, Brooke Adams underwater Nazi zombie movie. And to me, it's the Nazi zombie movie, if you will. And basically, it's an animal. If you saw Animal House and you said, you know, this film's a little too highbrow for me. There's a little too many literary references in this film. It's a little too competently made and tightly paced, and there's not enough farting in the film. Well, King Frat is the movie for you. It's an Animal House knockoff. It's lame. It's moronic. It's really fart-centric. I mean, it's flatulent. That's pretty much all it has going for it. And I kind of checked out of that movie pretty early on. And how much mooning is too much mooning in a film? Watch the first 5 minutes and you may find out. So that was night one. It was still fun. It was great to hang out with people. It was not as big a crowd as we wanted, but everybody there had a great time. And it was just a moronic, fun throwback to the 80s, the kind of movies that played drive-ins back in the 80s. Somebody who was there told me that they saw Up the Creek at a local drive-in when it came out back in 84. So, you know, how appropriate and how cool to have that experience again, you know, 40-something years later. Night two. We still have time. I'm just going to keep yapping. Night two was the marquee night. This was the big night. This was the big title that we were able to get. It was Revenge of the Nerds, which was a giant uber hit classic and spawned sequels and a TV show and merchandise and all kinds of stuff back in '84. It was that. It was, you'd think I'd remember because I just saw it, Zapped. Zapped, which was a favorite of mine. Favorite, I say, because it had a lot of nudity and I was too young to be seeing that, but it was on cable and my folks were out of town. Zapped stars Scott Baio and Willie Ames, and Scott Baio's a guy who, through some kind of mad science, gets superpowers, almost like Super Fuzz, and uses them for just purient interests. Scatman Crothers is in it and is hilarious. There's a really, really funny scene where he gets a puff of some wacky tobacco and has a fantasy, and it's really funny. And LaWanda Page on Esther is in it too. So there's some pretty cool things in Zapped. It's moronic and it's dopey and it's sexist and all that stuff, but I thought it was fun. And then the third film on Friday was a movie called Surf 2, which is really, really hard to see. Surf 2 barely came out in the theaters. It barely escaped into theaters back in '84. And I think it hit videotape, and that was it. It's never seen a DVD or any kind of release. I don't know that it's been on cable. Maybe it was on cable back in the '80s, but that was it. And it stars a bunch of people. I say Surf 2 is like a dumber, cruder version of Back to the Beach, if you know that movie. It's got Eddie Deason in it. It's got Lyle Wagner. It's got the Ron Palillo, who played Horseshack. It's got a lot of people you'd recognize. And it's this goofy movie about somebody who's engineering this certain kind of Coca-Cola or certain kind of cola beverage to control minds, and it turns people into garbage-eating punks, and it's just dopey with a lot of throwaway jokes. The soundtrack is really good, though. It has a lot of recognizable tunes. It's got like 2 Beach Boys songs, some very well-known 80s songs in it, and everybody has said that that's the reason why this has not come out on video again, is because music rights would just, however many people would want to buy Surf 2, that much money is never going to recoup the cost for the music rights alone, so it languishes in obscurity, and we were all treated to a 35mm print of that looked perfect. The problem was, where the drive-in is located, it gets foggy sometimes. And I don't know if you know how outdoor projection works, but when fog and just thick moisture gets between the projector beam and the screen, not a whole lot in the way of focus is hitting that screen. You're watching more, subtle shapes dancing on the screen than you are anything else. So at one point, I just looked to my left and right, and I just started cracking up because we're all we're sitting out in front of our cars in the front row, intently watching these movies that you can't see. And it wasn't the theater's fault. It was nobody's fault except just how the weather decided to happen. So a lot of people would just turn around and take pictures and enjoy looking at the projector beam because it was this beautiful, sharp beam of colors and everything. And at times, if it was a light enough fog, it almost looked like the image was just being pulled off the screen into the projection booth. It was kind of cool. So despite the fog, everybody had a great time. Everybody would be thrilled if this happened again, but due to the attendance, I don't know if it will. A man can dream. So what I want to talk about now is, I kind of went over this a week or so ago, and I want to do it again because these are really cool events that I think people who like the kind of stuff that I like should know about. None of them are too late to get to if you have a will and cash and a vehicle and loose morals. You can probably make this happen. So this is insane. Everything I'm talking about is happening this weekend, okay? So first of all, at the Mahoning, where I usually am, I'm not going to be there, but they're showing Grease and Grease 2. Now, if you know me personally, you know I rankle a little when certain films are announced as playing on the big screen because it's like the same 10 movies everybody shows when they show an old movie. Grease is one of them, especially for drive-ins. Every drive-in wants to go retro. The first 2 things they show are Grease and American Graffiti, which are great movies. I have no beef with these movies. They're fantastic, but it's what they always play. And we've had so many requests for Grease over the years. I was jokingly saying we should call this the put up or shut up weekend. It's like, do you want to show Grease? Do you want us to show Grease like everybody else? Okay, to show up when we show it, okay? So we're showing Grease and Grease 2, which nobody shows. And I like Grease 2. I saw Grease 2 before I saw the first Grease. Grease 2 was done in '82. It's a couple cast members carry over between the 2 movies. It's Rydell High again. Didi Khan's in it again. Maybe somebody else is in it again. And you have Michelle Pfeiffer playing a leather-clad biker, and you have Maxwell Caulfield as the squeaky clean Australian person who was the new guy in school, and they meet and sparks fly. It's essentially Grease with just the genders flipped. Grease 2 did this decades before what we're seeing now, where we see the gender reversed remakes of everything. What I said when I was talking about this on the radio, this is just my own personal opinion, not the drive-in, not this show, not this channel, not the service you're watching this on right now. Grease 2, Michelle Pfeiffer doing Cool Rider, worth the price of admission alone. I'm just saying. I'm saying it's worth sitting through that whole movie if you hate it. Cool Rider comes up, that may be the square up reel, as Dave Friedman would say. So Grease and Grease 2 are playing this weekend at the Mahoning in Laheyton, and I'm sure people will come dressed in 50s clothes. I'm sure 50s cars will roll up, and I'm sure it'll be a good time for everybody. I would be happy to be there and watch those if I were not doing the thing I'm about to talk about. So I've been doing this thing for like 10 years now. It was the thing that first got me into driving these crazy distances to go see movies. It was the thing that first got me to go to other drive-ins that weren't local to me, because I saw George Reese of DVDDrivein.com, which is like, to me, the definitive source for the kind of movies I like reviewed online. It's very much like Video Watchdog used to be, where you get a review of the movie and you get a very detailed review of the release as opposed to previous releases. So whether things are cut or whether the transfer is better or the extras are the same or whatever, DVD Drive-In is like #1 for that. He put on this thing called Drive-In Super Monsterama at the Riverside Drive-In in Vandergrift, Pennsylvania, which is pretty close to Pittsburgh, pretty close to Monroeville, where Dawn of the Dead was filmed. You can go to the Monroeville Mall pretty easily from there. Close to Evans City, Pennsylvania, which is where the opening of Night of the Living Dead was shot. So for horror fans who go to Monsterama, there are all these little day trips, these little pilgrimages people do all the time. And what it is it's 2 nights, 4 movies per night, $10 a head, $10 to sleep over on the lot, and they give you breakfast and set up a shower, which is pretty cool. And it's this amazing gathering of like-minded people. The nicest, as I like to say, for people who gather with the express purpose to watch people be murdered on screen, they're the nicest people you'd ever want to meet. It's 2 nights of retro horror stuff. So he's done a lot of Hammer, a lot of AIP. This weekend, this coming weekend, September 2021, I believe, whatever Friday and Saturday are, it is Spanish Horror Weekend. He did this once before. A lot of Paul Naschy films and just fun stuff that nobody shows. Fun stuff that hasn't hit a screen in this country other than a TV screen since the 70s, basically. So I'm going to read the lineup. So this will mean nothing to 99.9% of the people out there, but for that 0.1%, you're going to go, boing, I need to do this. So Friday night is Frankenstein's Bloody Terror, Dracula's Great Love, The Vampire's Night Orgy, and The Dracula Saga. Saturday is Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, which is actually a brand new 4K restoration, so that's digital. A lot of this is film prints. The majority of this is actually original film prints. Some digital where they can't get film, and it looks great. Night of the Seagulls, which is one of the Blind Dead films. The Craving, which I've never heard of, so I'm excited to see a movie I've never seen before, and Graveyard of Horror, which I've also never seen. So that's a Riverside Drive-In, Vandergrift, PA, this coming weekend, September 2021, and it's 2 days of cool folks hanging out. The coolest t-shirts you'll see will be worn by the people there. They do photo ops where they take somebody and dress them up like some scene in the movie, and they're always accurately done. Those are fun. The Creepy Classics is there. They have tons and tons of horror DVDs and Blu-rays and t-shirts and model kits, and it just turns it into like a little mini convention on the lot. And people I've got friends who I consider very good friends of mine who I only see once or twice a year when they go to that show, but so much of it is a social aspect. It's like you can have a perfectly great time and then watch movies all night. Tom Savini sometimes shows up just because he likes those movies too. Doug Bradley, who played Pinhead in Hellraiser, shows up because he likes those movies too. And everybody is just cool, it's just hanging out. So highly, highly recommend that if you're out in the Pittsburgh area. I know the show is seen all over the place. Or if you can, as Schwarzenegger said, paraphrasing, get your ass to Pittsburgh. If you can get out to Pittsburgh, it's absolutely worth it. I've never regretted a minute or a mile that I've spent doing that show, and I've only missed 2 due to circumstances beyond my control. Also happening this weekend, if you're not going to go to Pittsburgh, if your car doesn't have enough gas, if it won't hold enough gas to get to Pittsburgh, Dead Till Dawn Drive-In in Coxsackie, New York. That might not be how the town likes to pronounce it, but that's how it's spelled, so I'm going to call it Coxsackie, New York. You just cross the Climax Brook to get there, honestly. Highway Drive-In, really cool drive-in, 4-screener. They've been doing this for years. Friends of mine have been doing this for years. It's a great show. It's very edgy horror, and when you hear this lineup, you're gonna go, if you're like me. So night 1, Dawn of the Dead, Zombie, which is the Lucio Fulci unofficial sequel, Zombie 3, Zombie 4. Those are all one night at the drive-in for one ticket, very, very affordable ticket price. And they do raffles and they do giveaways, and the snack bar is huge and phenomenal, and they dress the entire snack bar up, and the staff dresses up as though it's Halloween. It's very, very cool, and they have fried Twinkies. They were running a 2-for-1 special when I went the last time, and I thought, oh cool, 2 little fried Twinkies for the price of 1, that's great. And they handed me 4 fried Twinkies. I did my best. I've learned that I cannot eat 4 fried Twinkies while playing a Terminator 2 pinball machine. So Saturday night is Phantasm, which is like one of my favorite movies ever. Phantasm, new restoration of Phantasm on the big screen, so it'll look better than it ever did in theaters. The Changeling with George C. Scott, which is a great, cold, slow burn Canadian ghost story horror film that is just a favorite of mine. That's also a recent restoration. Don't Torture a Duckling, which is a Lucio Fulci giallo, which I talked about on this show when Arrow put it out. It's arguably my favorite Fulci movie. And then Malatesta's Carnival of Blood, which Arrow also put out. That's like a regional horror film, weird, creepy, spooky, early 70s horror film set at a carnival. If it's the one I'm thinking of, maybe it's not. At any rate, it's really good. And that's Dead Till Dawn Drive-In, Coxsackie, New York Highway Drive-In. And that's this weekend again. That's September 2021, if my dates are correct. A day on either one of those. It's Friday and Saturday night. What can you say? Great group of folks runs that show. Great group of folks goes to that show. And like Monstrama or like the Mahoning that I talk about, it's very much a community. People just hang out outside their cars and talk horror movies and hang out and have fun, and you make friends. I don't want to say whether you want to or not, but I always wound up making friends, and I was never the kind of guy who was looking for that. So also this weekend, this Saturday night at the Alamo Drafthouse Yonkers, my indoor home away from home, we have Guilty Pleasures. Exhumed Films has been doing this show annually for years. It's a quadruple feature of just goofy, weird, trashy horror movies, the kind that I do so love, the kind that you probably don't want to give the time to do, but it's the kind of stuff that keeps me going. And they're doing 4 of these. And I was actually asked if I could transport the prints from Pennsylvania to New York yesterday, and I did. So it's thanks to me that that show is happening. Unless they asked somebody else to do it, in which case it would be thanks to them. Anyway, at one point I realized, the fate of these film prints lies in my hands and not driving off the road half asleep at 3 in the afternoon. So the Guilty Pleasures Marathon, Alamo Drafthouse Yonkers this Saturday. You have The Keep, Michael Mann's The Keep. This is a really rare film to see anywhere. It came out on VHS and Laserdisc in the early 80s, came out in the theater, and it's never been re-released anywhere. So for a lot of people, getting down to the Alamo this Saturday night to see The Keep that's just fine. Watch The Keep and leave. And I've heard friends saying as much. They're not that they would watch The Keep and leave, but they're like, I'm not going to miss The Keep. How else can you see that? And The Keep is sort of about, from what I recall, seeing it on cable, some kind of weird Nazi stronghold in World War II is keeping some artifact, some religious artifact, or something inside it. And it's really weird and creepy and stylish. It's Michael Mann, so if you know his work, it's in line with that. The Last Shark, which is an Italian Jaws sort of knockoff. Boarding House, which is a ridiculous, shot on video originally and then transferred to film and played in theaters, ridiculous possession movie set in the early 80s with this shirtless, weird, groovy guy and a bunch of ladies who look like they just walked off 20-minute workout. Frankenstein Meets the Space Monster, which is an early 60s, late 50s black and white, just ridiculous sci-fi movie. And I guess that's it. That's all 4. And then in between that, of course, it's exhumed. So there'll be insane trailers. There may well be giveaways. It's the Alamo, so you can order food. This is the conundrum of somebody like me and my friends who love this kind of stuff and soak up and feed upon these rare opportunities to see these movies that we never were probably alive for to see the first time in the theater or never played where we lived. The conundrum is all these are happening the same weekend. Now, I've never missed Monsterama, and I won't miss it for anything. So my choice was already made. I already had the hotel booked. That's what I'm going to go do. And then Dead Till Dawn's the same weekend. And I was like, oh, I love that show. I like hanging out with my friends there. This sucks, but I can't go. And then Guilty Pleasures was announced for the same weekend, and I love that show, and I can't go. So all the group of friends I have are basically being divided between all these places, and everybody's going to have a good time somewhere. I look forward to following it online and seeing what they all do and how it all works out for them. And I hope all the shows do well. The key, I will say repeatedly, knowing from last weekend at the drive-in, the key to specialty programming, as they call it at the Alamo, repertory programming, as they call it everywhere else, old movies, weird movies, independent movies, special screenings. The key to being able to see more of these is you going out and paying to see them. I mean, don't go if you don't want to, but bypassing it because you have it at home on tape or what decade am I living in? Bypassing it because you can watch it at home means you're not likely to have that chance again in the future if it's something you want to see even more. In the case of the Alamo, I know programming was canceled because it wasn't selling tickets. And it was really unique programming, and it's a damn shame. So support your local theater, period. Support your local independent theater. They need it more. Support your local theaters when they do something different. When the Colonial runs a Warren Miller film, or the Colonial runs an old movie, or they show an independent film, or they bring a guest filmmaker in. Go out and do that. It's amazing. Everything's better on the big screen. You get lost in the film so much easier, unless you get some schmo with their phone next to you. There's very often nothing between you and the screen, and it is just being soaked up in the cinema experience, getting lost in a story, no distractions that you would normally have at home. Again, if the theater's not full of... did I just say that? I'll bleep that out. Nobody heard me say that. Facebook heard me say that. Bleep out. Okay. I should probably stop. I don't have much more to say, and before I say another thing I'm going to have to go out and cut out later, we'll go to that other camera because, he set it up. Why not? And I'll give him a second to cue up the end. I don't even know if it's hard to cue stuff up anymore. It's a whole new system we have here. So it's going to be 2 weeks until I'm back again. Now, if you watch this show the week before I do the new show, there's no space at all. If you watch this a year later, there's no gap at all. I'll be off to Pittsburgh to do Monsterama, and that takes me through Monday when we normally tape. But then I'll be back with a recap of those shows if I feel like it, if I don't have time like this week, or just what's come out in the interim. There'll be a bunch of movies coming out, like I said, Ad Astra, Rambo, Downton Abbey, a whole bunch of stuff on video, a whole bunch of Arrow titles. So it should be a much more densely packed and less me rambling about stuff I care about show. I'm Mark, I'm the Cinemaniac, and I will see you at the movies. Bye.